All right, please turn to the book of Zephaniah. We continue our study this evening of the prophecy of Zephaniah. We got through verse 9 last time. So if you turn to the book of Zephaniah, chapter 1 and verse 10, please. We began last time discussing the fact that Zephaniah was a prophet, as it says in verse 1, during the reign of Josiah, who was a prophet in the southern nation, the nation of Judah, after the northern nation of Israel had been taken into captivity by Assyria. The southern nation alone was left. And Zephaniah was a prophet, and the reign of Josiah, who was a righteous king, the last good king that Judah had. Following him came 4 kings, several of whom were sons of Josiah, but they were wicked, and God had determined because of the sins of the nation that they were going to go into captivity. So that's pretty much what the book of Zephaniah is about. That God predicts through Zephaniah that his wrath is going to come against Jerusalem and Judah and the nations around it. We'll see at the end, though, that a remnant would be spared. So the first chapter we've begun talks about the punishment and the destruction, and chapter 2 talks about what will happen to other nations around them. And then the third chapter concludes with other warnings and hope for the future of the nation. So as we looked at chapter 1 last time, he described the punishment that would come upon the nation of Judah and Jerusalem. The idols would be cut off, and so on, which brought us down through verse 9 at the end of our study last time. Questions or comments, discussion anybody has through verse 9? All right, let's go ahead and read some more this evening as we continue. Let's read chapter 1, verse 10 through... Well, let's read 10 through 16 to start with. I'd like to read chapter 1, verse 10 through 16 for us, please. Chapter 1, verse 10 through 16, please. Bill, please.
And there shall be on that day, says the Lord, the sound of mournful cry from the feast gate, a wailing from the second quarter, and a loud crashing from the hills. Well, ye inhabitants of Makdesh, for all the merchant people are cut down, all those who handle money are cut off. And it shall come to pass at that time that I will search Jerusalem with lamps and punish the men who are settled in complacency, who say in their heart, the Lord will not do good, nor will he do evil. Therefore their goods shall become booty, and their houses a desolation. They shall build houses, but not inhabit them. They shall plant vineyards, but not drink their wine. The great day of the Lord is near, and is near and hastens quickly. The noise of the day of the Lord is big. There the mighty men shall cry out, that the day is a day of wrath, a day of trouble and distress, a day of devastation and desolation, a day of darkness and gloominess, a day of clouds and thick darkness, a day of trumpet and alarm against the fortified cities and against the high towers.
Okay. So we go back to verse 10 then. He is predicting a day of the Lord. And we discussed last time, verse 7, the concept of the day of the Lord. What is the significance of the expression, the day of the Lord, especially in the prophets? Day of the Lord is what, Debbie?
A day of judgment.
Day of judgment. Okay, and we pointed out that the final judgment is not the only day of the Lord. But there have been many times that God has predicted a day of the Lord in which he would come upon usually a nation or city with punishment for their evils. So this is a description of a day of the Lord. And he says it's going to, verse 8, that it's going to be a day of the Lord's sacrifice. So what did we decide that sacrifice would be? What was going to be sacrificed? The last part of verse 7, the Lord prepared a sacrifice. What was the sacrifice? Terry?
Judah.
All right. Judah, in particular the city of Jerusalem. That's what was going to be sacrificed. The people were going to be punished and slain. Many would be killed, and many would go into Babylonian captivity. And it says that he's prepared a sacrifice. He has invited his guests. Who are the guests who would come to partake of the sacrifice? Susie.
Chaldeans.
All right, the Chaldeans, Babylonians. They were the ones who were going to offer this, in essence, the sacrifice. Of course, they didn't understand that, but God did. That was his intent. All right, so on that day, verse 10, things are going to happen, described in verse 10 and 11. So what does he describe? What does he say is going to happen on that day? And we're now at question number 16. Describes various sounds that would be heard, and so on. So verse 10, what does he say is going to happen? What are the sounds that are going to be heard? What's he describing? Verse 10. Frank.
There will be a cry that will be heard from the fish gate, and a wail from the second quarter, and a loud crash from the hills. But I was just wondering, I don't know what the significance of those places are for this.
I think that's the next question, Frank. Okay. All right, so these places, the fish gate and so on, but there's this, there's going to be the sound of mourning and wailing and crashing and so on. It really goes into verse 11, so let's go ahead and look at it, because I ask you what, if you could determine what Maktesh or Maktesh, what that referred to, question number 17. What's he describing here? Terry.
Well, it's the place where they would grind their grain. This is what I found out about it. The Valley of Siloam was a place where they would grind their grain, and the idea being their commerce would come to an end, their food would come to an end.
Okay. All right, so all of these places he describes, all these things he described have to do with the merchants and their commerce, the businesses, and the selling of various products. Specifically where they are or what they are isn't really, I don't think, the main point, although I suppose that the people he was in Jerusalem that he was writing to knew about them. But I don't think it's so important for us to know where this fish gate was or the second quarter was and so on. The important thing is it's talking about the merchant people, as you see at the end of verse 11. And they are going to be cut down. They're going to be, those who handle money will be cut off. So included in this punishment of destruction is going to be punishment in the end of those who were the merchants, those who made money, and the businesses of the city of Jerusalem. Okay? So why would that be a problem? What's the first part of verse 17? Why would that be a source of mourning and wailing? Why would that be a difficulty? Debbie?
Because even the common people have to buy food.
All right, so the problem is people won't have the things that they need. If you can imagine, if none of the places that we go to buy food and what our necessities, whatever, if they were all suddenly destroyed, that we could not go to where we would need the things that we want to buy and so on, you can imagine what would happen, and that's what's happening in Jerusalem. The source of the people's needs would no longer be available to be met. Okay? Other comments to 10 and 11? Anybody? All right, so this is just a major part of the destruction of the city and the problems that would come because of the sins of the people. Okay, mourning and wailing. And now he's going to continue to describe it more in the following verses. Anything else to verse 11? All right, so verse 12 then, he says he's going to search Jerusalem with lamps. What's the significance of that? Question number 19. Well, I remember, of course, that this is almost certainly symbolic, as much of the prophecy is. What is the significance of searching the city with lamps? Debbie?
Because it's dark.
Okay, all right.
Searching the corners and crevices and everything like that.
I'm sorry?
They're searching crevices and corners.
Okay, all right. Yeah, Susie?
Well, if God is using His light, it would be like the light of righteousness, and He's looking all around. So evil's not going to be able to escape from His light.
Okay, so obviously, again, it's a symbol. and combining what Debbie and Susie said, there's no way to hide from God. God is going to know, he's going to see, he knows the evil, he knows what the people do, but there's also no way to hide from his punishment. You can't escape it. Everybody he's going to find, and there's going to be punishment, no matter who it is, no matter where they are. And so the last part of the verse, he's going to punish the men, it says, who are settled in complacency. So even the people who are complacent think that it's not going to happen. Nevertheless, they're going to be punished. They're not going to escape. Now, it says they're settled in complacency, but there's a difference in the translation on that. So let's look at that, what he means by that as well. Last part of question number 20. Some of your translations talk about those who are settled on their lees. So what's the significance of being settled on their lees? What are the lees? And you're settled on your lees, what's that mean? Anybody find the answer on that one? Steve?
It's a metaphor of wine making imply laziness and indifference.
Okay. So it has to do with the process of when the grapes were squeezed and they would be put in a container of some kind, there would be impurities that would settle out to the bottom. And they would, from time to time, they would pour off the juice so that they would just get the pure juice without the impurities, the lees at the bottom. But if the wine, or the water, remember wine in the Bible is not always intoxicated, but if it sits on the lees, then it remains with the impurities. It's not cleansed from the impurities, it stays with the impurities. And so as Steve said, it's an expression for indifference. So if people are settled on their lees, it's obviously a symbol. And the idea being then that they're not bothered by the impurities. It's fine with them to stay where it's impure. They don't bother to cleanse the impurities. So these people were complacent, the New King James says. And he explains it in the last part of the verse. What do they say in their hearts? The last part of verse 12. They're complacent, they say what? Last part of verse 12.
The Lord will act for good or evil.
All right, so God's not going to do anything. We don't have to worry about the Lord. He's not going to do good, he's not going to do evil. In other words, he's not going to, if we serve him, there won't be no blessing. If we don't serve him, there won't be no consequence. So they're not concerned about God and his involvement in their lives. They are complacent. They are settled on their lees. So it's okay with them to stay where they are. They're not willing to change. They're not willing to repent. They're not willing to correct their lives. They'll stay where they are, and they don't worry about the consequences. Okay? So what God says then in the verse is that he's going to search out those kind of people, as well as other people. But the people who think it's not going to happen, people who think there's no problem, he's going to find them. They're not going to escape. They're mistaken. All right, so comments, questions through verse 12. What do we learn? What are some applications for us? Question number 21. What do we learn from this? Steve?
Not to leave God out of your plans.
All right. Don't leave God out of your plans. Okay, other comments? Sharon?
One definition I found for complacent is uncritically satisfied. And I think we think of being critical as something that's bad, and obviously we want to be kind in the way we speak to others. But when it comes to sin, we need to be critical. We need to be looking in for ourselves and looking for sin and getting rid of it. And looking, when we see it in other people, we need to be lovingly helping them to get rid of it, and not just leaving it there.
Okay. So are there situations, do we see, whether in ourselves, in the church, or in the society, people who think God's not going to do good, he's not going to do evil, so they're satisfied with the way they are? Sure they are, aren't they? They're all around us. And sometimes, if we're not careful, it's us. Okay? So we have to realize that when God says, this is the way you live, you need to live, and if you don't, there's this consequence. If you do, there's this blessing. When God says that, he means what he says. And you can't just ignore it and think you're going to be okay. All right? And yet that's what people often do, don't they? Brian?
I think kind of go further with that idea perhaps. If you look at the beginning of verse 12 and the idea of, I'm going to search this place out with lamps. The light makes manifest the truth. And ultimately, if you follow through what the verse says there, I'm going to search out Jerusalem with lamps and punish those who are complacent. So there's a relationship between those two things. They are complacent, and their complacency has made it so that there are things that God's going to discover that they're doing that's evil. They should have been aware of that themselves. They should have been searching out their own lives with the lamp of God's word and understanding the truth.
Okay, so we may be complacent with evil, but God's not, is he? God's never satisfied with evil. And so we have a responsibility to look for the evil in our own lives and correct it, and understand that God blesses us if we do what he wants, but otherwise there's going to be consequence, and that's the point with the nation of Judah and the city of Jerusalem. Other comments through verse 12? Susie?
Amos said the same thing, just different words. Amos 6:1, woe to those who are at ease in Zion.
So we talked about him in the book of Amos, didn't we? At ease in Zion, it describes the various, especially materialistic people who are satisfied because things are going well physically for them. They've got what pleasures, they have possessions, they have things they want, so they're satisfied. They're settled on their lees. They're complacent. But God says you need to serve him, otherwise there are consequences. All right. So verse number 13 then, what will happen to them? Okay, they said the Lord's not going to do anything, but what will he do? What is going to happen in verse 13? What's going to happen to him? Right, verse 13, the question number 22. What will happen to him? Andrew.
Everything they've prepared, their houses, their crops, it's going to be enjoyed by someone else because they're going to be parted off to someone else.
All right. So he says your goods will become booty, spoils. Somebody else is going to take what you have. Okay? Their houses, they'll build the house, but they won't live in it. They'll plant the vineyards, but they won't drink the wine. Okay? Discussion, comments? What's the application of that to people who are complacent? Satisfied, especially physically, because they're materialistic, like in our society, they've got the things they need, so they think that everything's okay with me. We're doing well, but they're not serving the Lord. What's the consequence? Susie?
Well, they may still be rich and enjoy this life, but ultimately they'll lose everything in the end.
All right, so it doesn't say, for us it doesn't say when, no. He's telling them when this is going to happen. When is this going to happen to them? When are they going to lose their houses and their vineyards? When's that going to happen? Or how? Terry?
They're going to be taken away from into captivity.
When the Babylonians come, then the nation's going to be taken into captivity. They're going to lose it. Now, people today may not know when or how, but sooner or later, they may enjoy, even for years, those houses and their properties, their lands. But sooner or later, don't we all leave it? We all do, don't we? It may happen in this life with financial reverses or with a war or a depression or what have you. But if not, then when life's over. And that's why we can't dare to be complacent. You and I cannot dare to be satisfied with a life that's not serving the Lord. Brian?
Luke 12, full of this night your soul will be required of you, the person who was happy with what they had done materially in the world, but they weren't serving God.
And we can think about in Luke 12, the foolish farmer who had everything he wanted, to build bigger barns, thought he had many goods laid up for many years, but the Lord said he was foolish because his soul would be required that night. Okay? So much more to life than physical things. We have Even though we may be richly blessed, even in this country, that's fine, appreciate it, but don't be complacent. Don't think that that's what life's about, because it's not. Anything else through verse 13? Terry.
We have a very vivid example of this going on right now in the world, in the Ukraine. Some of those people are Christians over there, and they're seeing it happen. That overnight they lost everything that they thought was secure for themselves, but they lost it all. And I'm not saying that the Christians there are complacent about that, but we feel safe and secure in this country. But you don't know what's coming tomorrow.
That hasn't crossed your mind that the problem in Ukraine could spread, or that other aggressive nations could continue this kind of thing, and it could involve us. Maybe even some of our blessings may be taken from us. This world is not our home. It's not. Yes. Nancy.
Well, I was just thinking about Ecclesiastes. The whole book is saying these are blessings that you have that God gave you, but if you don't have God in your life, it is all vanity. Your life has to be lived for God. He blesses you with things, but it's not the things that this life that matter in this life. It's over and over again he calls it vanity and grasping after the wind, because it's all going to be gone.
So fear God and keep His commandments. That's what life is
It has no
really
meaning
about.
if God is not at the center of it.
All right, let's move on then. Verse 14, again, the great day of the Lord is near. This day of judgment, this day of punishment. How does he describe when it's coming? What does he say about when? What information does he give us? Question 23. What does he tell us about it?
It is near.
It's near.
Comes quickly.
Near and hastens quickly. Now, we talked about that several times in regard to these prophecies. Some prophecies are for the distant future, something that's way out there, maybe even hundreds of years. Some of the prophecies of Isaiah prophesying the gospel, chapter 53, the death of Jesus, hundreds of years before those things came to pass. But this one is coming quickly. Quickly, it says. Hastens, it's near. And remember, if you go back to our chart, Josiah, the last good king, we're like within maybe 40 years or so of the downfall. The Babylonians are coming. And in God's timetable, that's near. It's not going to be long. Okay? What else does he tell us about the day of the Lord in verse 14? It's near, it's soon. What else? Susie? Oh, somebody else said something then. Who was the other person who spoke up? Is that you, Steve? What did you say?
Bitter.
Bitter.
Bitter and mighty men shall cry out.
All right, it's bitter. And the mighty men cry. What's the significance of the mighty men crying out? Who would the mighty men be? The mighty men, Susie?
Like warriors, army, warriors and military.
Okay, these are the soldiers.
Bravado, usually. Their shouts are not whimpers, but they're going to be very bitter because of the destruction.
Okay, bitter and crying out. Either this is going to be a time of fear, even for the men that people tend to think of as being strong and brave and soldiers and so on. Even for them, it's going to be a time when they cry out. This is going to be troublesome and fearful, even for them. Okay? Verse 15, why? What's going to happen? And we ask you question number 24. A whole list of expressions describing the day of the Lord in verse 15. So what are some things he says about it? Verse 15. Rick.
Says there's going to be wrath, trouble, distress,
devastation, desolation, darkness, gloominess, clouds and thick darkness, trumpet and alarm against high towers.
Okay. So again, some of this may not be literal, but nevertheless, the impression being left is a very, very fearful day, a day of great wrath. So all these different expressions, which we have seen these kind of things in other of the minor prophets and even in Jesus' teaching in Matthew 24 about the destruction of Jerusalem, in the New Testament prophecy of it, this kind of terminology describing the fear of it, the terribleness of it, and that it's something truly troubling. Comments on 15, anybody, and the description there. And when's it coming? Quickly. Not going to be long till you face this. Debbie?
I was looking back on Josiah's life. After he died, his sons only reigned maybe 11 or 12 years between three of them. So it was really quick.
I'm sorry, Debbie. I'm having trouble hearing you tonight, I guess. Could you speak up and say that again? I'm not sure I got your point, and I don't want to comment if I'm not sure.
After Josiah died, the good king, his sons were kings, one for 3 months, one for 11 years, one for 3 months and 10 days. I mean, it was real quick. I mean, they didn't have long before Babylon was there.
And we see, just like we saw at the end of the nation of Israel, sequence of kings. Nobody seemed to last very long because there would be a replacement. So you have a nation that is unstable politically, unstable without economically, and all of the things that people relied upon were falling. And that's what's happening. And God says that's what's going to happen here quickly. Okay? Other comments on verse 15. All right, 16 says it's a trumpet. What's the significance of the trumpet in verse 16? Susie?
Armies.
Okay, a warning. So it says a trumpet and alarm. Danger is coming. And we talked about the watchman on the wall, watching for enemies, watching for danger. All right, so they would blow the trumpet. And it's a day of trumpet and alarm against the fortified cities and against the high towers. Warning, danger is coming quickly, and all these problems are going to come when Babylon comes with destruction upon the city. Questions, comments through 16? Anybody? I just need to read a little bit more of it. Who'd like to read? Let's just finish the chapter. Who'd like to read verse 17 and 18 for us, please? Chapter 1, 17 and 18. Steve, please.
And I will bring distress upon men, that they shall walk like blind men, because they have sinned against the Lord, and their blood shall be poured out as dust, and their flesh as the dung. Neither their silver nor their gold shall be able to deliver them in the day of the Lord's wrath. But the whole land shall be devoured by the fire of his jealousy, for he shall make even a speedy riddance of all them that dwell in the land.
Okay. So distress is going to come upon them, which you would expect based on the things he's just described. There's going to be a distressing time. But it describes more specifics about it. It says they walk like blind men. Verse 17. What's the significance of walking like a blind men? And we're in question number 26 now. What's the significance of walking like blind men, Tara?
They can't see where they're going. They don't know what direction they're headed. They don't know what's going to happen.
Okay. They don't know, and so they're confused. They don't know what to expect, and they don't know how to deal with it. Okay? If you don't know, if you can't see, you don't know what's happening to you, then you don't know what's causing any problem that comes, any hardship, you don't know what's causing it, you don't know what to do with it, you don't know how to react to it. That's the way these people would be when the destruction came. Confused, unable to deal with it because they don't understand. But they would understand and they would see if they'd been listening to God, then why are they blind? What does the verse say about the reason for their blindness? They're blind because what?
Sin against the Lord.
Because they're sin. That's why they're blind. That's why these problems are happening in the first place, and that's why they don't understand. They haven't been listening to the prophets. The prophets have explained what's going to happen and why, but they're not listening. They're complacent, and they're in sin. So the last part of verse 17 then describes their blood and their flesh. And what's the significance of what it says about their blood and their flesh in verse 17? What would happen to it? Frank.
It'd just be total destruction of loss of life, and not the, it wouldn't be the normal caring for people who die in a normal way. I mean, it wouldn't be taken to have a funeral service and buried. They'd just be left.
Okay, and that's what we typically understand about death. But death is always a sad time, but we usually honor the dead by burial, caring for them, and expressing our concern and so forth, and our appreciation for them, but not with these people. The destruction is going to be so widespread and so violent, and that there's not going to be time for that. They're going to be poured out like dust, and their flesh like garbage. Just so much bodies to be destroyed, to be set aside, because whoever survives isn't going to have time, or they're too busy running or being captured or taken. It's a time of tragedy for all in which you can't even express appreciation for your loved ones. Okay, questions, comments, 17? Terry.
When we read this, it seems so horrible to contemplate that. But what God wants us to see are these are the consequences of our own sin. These people brought these things on themselves, even though God had pleaded with them to turn back from it. They wouldn't listen. And we see it just reading it cold like this in far distant time from us. It's so horrible to contemplate, but God wants us to see sin as horribly as it is, and the consequences are horrible.
And I hope we have thought about that as we've gone through these studies. Again and again in the prophets, we've talked about the suffering, first of all, the prophets during the divided kingdom, especially talking to the north and the Assyrians coming and all the terrible things. Now the southern kingdom and God's bringing the Babylon, all the terrible things. We think about them and their consequences because of their sins. But there's a reason why this is in the Bible. This wasn't just written for them. It's here because people in all ages need this. This is not just the people in Jerusalem and Judah or in Samaria. That we won't suffer the same way, but we will have the consequences of sin if we don't obey. Sharon?
Doesn't this expression, blood being poured out, kind of refer back to verse 8 when he said they're the sacrifice? Like in Psalm 106, when it says that people sacrificed their sons and daughters and poured out innocent blood, they sacrificed them. And that would contrast to the Lord's Supper when Jesus says, like in Luke 22, that he poured out his blood for us. God's making them the sacrifice here.
Okay, interesting comment. Okay, other comments through verse 17? Okay. Now then, verse 18. He continues to describe what's going to happen to the land. What will happen to the land according to verse 18 then? Steve?
Devoured by fire.
It'll be devoured? Okay. But what kind of fire? What kind of fire is going to devour it? Now, it's going to be literal fire, no doubt, but that's not what he describes here is what kind of fire, Bill?
Fire of his jealousy.
Fire of his jealousy. And what's he jealous about? We've discussed this concept before. What's he jealous about? Rick.
The people not following him, but instead turning to material things or to idol worship or anything except God.
Okay. Because they're supposed to be his people. They're supposed to be worshiping and serving him. And him as the only God. See, not with idols where there's lots of different gods and you can take your pick. One God, the true God, the creator God. And if people don't worship him, then he has a right to be upset about it. If they serve the idols, or, as Rick pointed out, more today, if we serve material things, if physical things in this life are what's important to us, whether you're talking entertainment, recreation, possessions, sports, or other things that may not be sinful, but if that's what's important to us, God has a right to be jealous about that and to be upset with us because we don't put him in the proper position in our lives. Okay? All right, so first of all, he's going to be, it says, they're going to be devoured by the fire of his jealousy. But there's some other things it says too. What else does it say will happen in the day of the Lord's wrath? What else? Terry.
That neither silver or gold will be able to deliver them from this destruction.
All right. Neither their silver nor their gold will deliver them in the day of the Lord's wrath. Why? What's the lesson to them? Why does he say that? Frank.
When the Chaldeans come in, they'll just take everything anyway. So they can't offer to them for their freedom and for their lives, because they'll just take it anyway and take their lives too.
Okay. So you suppose when the Chaldeans came in that you saw the Babylonian soldiers coming to take your house, you could say, here, I'll give you, equivalent, we'll say, I'll give you $100,000 if you leave my house alone, let me know. Is that going to do any good? They're going to take it anyway. Okay. Silver and gold would be no defense. The enemy's going to take that anyway. Okay. But what kind of people would not tend to not think that way? Would not tend to not be concerned about that? Nancy.
People that put their trust in their possessions and their wealth.
Okay. And so many people think that I've got money, I've got investments, I've got insurance, I'm taken care of, like that rich farmer in Luke 12. I'm okay. But the truth is, they don't realize how weak a defense it is. There may be some advantages to it in this life, but they don't realize the weakness of that as a defense. Did I see another hand, Susie?
Well, going back to earlier in the chapter, he talks about those who make merchandise of other people, that take advantage of the weak and the poor and make their wealth off of them. So they're the kings, the servants of the kings, the princes, the merchants, all those that we've been talking about. He's saying, no, that's not going to work.
Okay. Terry.
When you look at the end of the verse, this is the day of the wrath of the Lord. You can't offer the Lord money to prevent him from dispensing the righteous judgment of his wrath. And nothing they could offer him now will work. They had the opportunity to offer him their repentance and their service, and they didn't use that opportunity. And there's nothing now, including the silver and gold, that he wants. He doesn't want our silver and gold.
So that's the real application, isn't it? It isn't just the Babylonians you can't buy off. Someone else is behind all this. This is happening for a purpose, and that purpose is far greater than the Babylonians. They don't. The Babylonians didn't even realize why they were the power behind what they were doing. God's the power. And what money are you going to offer God? You're going to say, here, you can have my bank accounts. Is that going to make a difference to God? Okay, I think Brian and then Steve. Brian?
Yeah, well, just related to that, trusting in uncertain riches, and God, it all belongs to Him anyway. It's all His. So to go along with some of the ideas that have put forth, when it comes to judgment for us, we can't say, well, here, God, let me give you all this stuff that I've acquired, all these possessions that I've acquired. That's not what God's interested in. It's His anyway. We're just stewards of the things that He's entrusted us with. And there's judgment associated with how we use those things.
Okay, so if God needed something, does He need us to give it to Him? If He wanted something, say, I want this. I want a few stars here and there. I want a few planets. Well, He doesn't need us. He just make whatever He wants. So no amount of possessions or wealth or power that we have is going to make any difference to Him. Steve, you had a comment. Steve?
I just said, what Brian said, everything we have is God's anyway.
Okay. So if everything we have is God's, then as He says, neither silver nor gold will deliver in the day of the Lord's wrath. Not just Babylon's wrath, but the Lord's wrath. So the last part of verse 18, what's going to happen to the nation? What's going to be the end result, Debbie?
A speedy riddance.
Speedy riddance. Okay, and it's coming soon. And sure enough, it didn't take long, did it? Even by human standards, it didn't take long. Speedy riddance of all those who dwell on the land, which means what's going to happen to the land? If there's a speedy riddance of those who dwell, what's going to happen, Debbie?
It'll just go back to wild.
Yeah, the land's going to be empty. That doesn't mean it's going to take everybody. There were some people who were left. But here's a description here of the consequences of sin, the punishment that will come when people do what they want instead of what God wants. And that's the lesson for you and for me. Anything else before we close? All right, chapter 2 next time actually continues chapter 1, showing what they should be doing about it. And then it's going to begin to describe consequences to other nations round about. So we'll take up in chapter 2 next time then. Thank you.